Today we cover Muscovy, which turned out to be one of my favorite nations I've played so far. And if you guys are going to pick up EU5, I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to support the channel. I do think EU5 is going to be very fun. Despite all the negative things I may say, I do think it's going to be a fantastic game. So yeah, consider that. If not, no worries. Let's get into this Muscovy AAR. And we'll also give it some thoughts, and maybe I'll ask you guys some questions that you can write in the comments. Now, this map is a bit off, as we don't have the ability to give updated screenshots or anything like that. So I just wanted to note that you're not a subject of the Golden Horde like this. I believe in the build that the screenshot was on, maybe they had a situation where the organization leader caused this. I'm not sure, but the point being is that you're not all the same color here. But anyhow, we start with 328,000 pops or population. We start with 90 ducats. And to note, we're making about 2.36 ducats a month. So we're not really that rich of a nation to start. But we do have a lot of lumber available, which means we can get a good price on our geos. And just to note, the things I like to automate in general are going to be trade, production methods, and then the assign admiral and assign general. And that's pretty standard for most of my games, of just how I automate. Sometimes I'll have to turn off trade automation like I do in this campaign, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The things that I want to value here are going to be serfdom for peasant taxes and centralization for proximity cost. And for privileges, I generally try to give out any privileges that aren't against my values. Let's give you an example where I have plus 30 towards centralization. That means that I'm okay to grant away, let's say, plus 20 to decentralization, as long as I'm still positive, just the way that values work. And if you don't know how that works, I'll just briefly explain it. Let me give you the example of the centralization versus decentralization. As long as I'm trending at least a little bit towards centralization, let's say 10, then I can continuously click events that push me further towards centralization. And we're not going to be pulled back towards that only 0.10 that we have, just so you can kind of understand. So as long as we're a little bit towards centralization, we're perfectly fine. That means that we can grant privileges so long as we're not pushing the opposite value. And for estates, we want to grant out a lot or as many privileges as possible, because every privilege gives loyalty to the estates, which means that we can tax them more without them being upset and things like that. However, each time we grant a privilege, it's going to take away 5 legitimacy. We don't want to drop below 40 legitimacy, or we could be at risk of getting a coup. So we're not able to grant all privileges immediately, but we're going to kind of trickle them in, always making sure we're not putting ourselves into a potential disaster. Early on, we get an event that has to do with this sort of tribute that we have to pay to the Golden Horde. And just to note, the tribute slider, I just want to explain that real quick. There's a slider, and if you pay max on the slider, you actually get a little bit of prestige. If you pay 0 on the slider, then you would lose development. But I tend to just put the slider at the middle. That way you're not losing development, but I don't really need the prestige gained. Even with that, though, we're probably paying at least 1 to 2 a month early on. And, that's pretty significant because we only make about 2 ducats a month. So it's potentially taking away like 50% of our surplus money, I suppose. We make 2 ducats, we could be making 3. Although there is an event early on that's a historical event, and it has to do with kind of taxing everyone else more, but it makes everyone have a negative 100 relations with you. It is the historical option, meaning that it's what happened historically. But I don't want to take all the negative relation penalties, so I just go ahead and don't do that. I did note we start with some unintegrated land, and so we're going to have to use both our cabinet actions to integrate. So go ahead and just grab those 2 cabinet members to do that, and that's perfectly fine for now. Before we go any further, I did want to mention this is my second time playing Muscovy. The first time I didn't really take detailed notes, so I want to do a second run. And the reason I want to give that context is I know how these guys feel, so I'm not completely unexperienced when playing these guys, just for some context. Anyways, 1340 rolls around, it's Parliament, and we're going to get a claim against Novgorod, and we're going to co-belligerate a bunch of people. If we're going to fight them, we might as well co-belligerate. I don't know exactly who we fight, but just kind of imagine we fight Novgorod and some of the neighbors. And again, the map is completely different than it is here, so it's kind of not super viable to even use this map, but it is what it is. I suppose I found a bit of a better screenshot, but it's kind of low res, and but I guess we'll use this one instead because it gives you a little bit more of an indicator of what's going on here. So we're going to go ahead and deck on Novgorod, and we're going to co-belligerate Tver, as well as this little nation here. I can't even see what it is because the resolution's so bad. And then I believe we also co-belligerate this nation. Now, in the war, it's actually a really tough war, and it's kind of what I would call a coin flip war, where there's one battle that's 3,000 versus 3,000 that really determines the outcome of the war. We were able to win it. My point in saying so is that it's kind of a 50-50 war. There's definitely a war where like EU4 skill kind of takes over. The idea that I'm a war with a bunch of small nations, and it's going to take Novgorod a little bit to arrive. So if we can beat down the smaller nations first, then we're going to be in good shape. But if we allow them to group, we kind of be in trouble. So again, just kind of leaning on my EU4 experience for this war. The outcome of the war is that I separate peace, let's say Kharchev, and then I take some land over here as well, kind of up here. Like, it doesn't really matter too much what I take, just kind of demonstrating. And then we go ahead and annex Tver as well. And we take this one piece of land from Novgorod. We want to take more from Novgorod, but we realize we're going to get coalitioned. And I really am not trying to get coalitioned, immediately when I start a campaign. I decided just not to take much from Novgorod, which is kind of weird because I made him the main war target and then ended up just not being able to take the land I wanted. But not a big deal. We figured we'll come back later, and that's A-okay. So I want to stop paying this tax that I've been paying. I'm referring to the Tater yoke. I know I'm mispronouncing that, and I apologize. I know I'm going to get a comment that tries to tell me how to pronounce it. The point being is I don't want to pay this tax anymore, but I don't think I can really beat the Golden Horde. And just a bit later on, I noticed that the Golden Horde is being attacked by 2 nations at once, and I'm like, hey, this looks like a free time. So we go ahead and get a CB that we fabricate to dismantle the institution. We go ahead and declare that war, and it's fairly easy. Again, he's already being attacked by 2 other nations, and it does take us about 50 war score to get there. It takes us a little bit, but not really any interest in that war because it's mostly just about me carpet sieging his nation while he's trying to deal with other people fighting him. And he's kind of struggling internally as well. So it's not like I fight well or anything. It's just kind of like, okay, this is pretty easy to deal with. And then we no longer have to deal with paying that tax. And that happens around 1350. Just to give a bit of an update in 1360, we are just annexing our subjects now. So all that land we took in the first war, we made into subjects. It's kind of what we normally do. And we're just getting through the annexation process here. Next, we're going to war with this little nation over here. And they're allied to Smolensk, as well as some guys over here. And we didn't co-belligerate because that would call in Novgorod, and we didn't want to deal with that. But what we're going to do is make them annul treaties with their allies, and so that we were able to kind of continue to expand in these directions. And part of the reason why we want this land too is it's near our capital, and of course, stuff that's most near capital is kind of the most value for you, since it's all based on control. A little bit later, we get an event. It's called the Perkazi. Probably not pronouncing that right, but what it does is it gives you a bunch of new cabinet actions. And the one that's really insane is there's one that provides tax efficiency and proximity impact. So it's a cabinet action, and then when you're using it, depending on how good your cabinet efficiency is or how good your cabinet member is, you get a certain amount of tax efficiency and proximity impact. So I know that at this point in the game, when I make the guy the cabinet leader and I pick a good cabinet member, that we're getting plus 16% tax efficiency, as well as -8 proximity impact. And while we're on the subject, I do want to note, much later in the game, I'm able to get plus 30% tax efficiency and -15 proximity impact. So you can kind of see that it scales over time because you get better and better, more cabinet efficiency as the game goes on. I think this is probably the best cabinet action in the game, at least so far. I've only played so many nations. So I know in 1364 that we're going to go ahead and go to war with Smolensk, and we made him annul with his allies recently, so this isn't going to be a particularly difficult war. And I want to talk about the weird co-belligerate thing. So even though we made him a annul, he's still allied to Novgorod. But the way that co-belligerate works is that it makes the strongest target the war leader. So in this case, Novgorod. What's weird about that is you can kind of separate piece who was your original war target, which is kind of strange. But I wanted to note something strange, and this is probably something I should leave feedback on, is that if you take the war goal from the now secondary target that you originally declared the war on, it turns the war into a no CB war goal, meaning that you would have to pay plus 100%. So it's kind of just a weird thing that I noticed that I thought I would mention. I also did want to note that Muscovy has access to a modifier. I think it might be called the Rus, and I think this is a similar thing called an EU4, but it gives -10 antagonism. This is basically just like -10 AE impact from EU4, but it's a unique reform specific to Muscovy. So more or less, we just take whatever we can from Smolensk. I think we can fully annex them, if I recall correctly. And I did want to note that in this war, there's a situation where there's double forts. And once I put my units here, I can't move because now I'm kind of blocked by the second fort. So it's really a weird scenario. And the guy starts to run in and try to carpet siege me. And I solved this just by disbanding my levies and then re-recruiting new ones. So anyways, just want to mention that as a weird thing. I'm like, I don't know if that's intended, but I kind of got fully trapped in that scenario. So we're going to take a bit more in this war after we get that AE mod. And I then want to tell you guys something that I discovered that I potentially should leave feedback on. Maybe you guys can be the judge of that. Something I noticed about antagonism. So with antagonism, it's very similar to EU4 in the sense that if you have 50 antagonism, then those people can coalition against you. However, I noticed if you improve relations with people with antagonism, you get insane value. Basically, what I mean by this is that normally your antagonism would decay at something like 0.2 a month. But if you improve relations, this goes up to 1.2 a month, which to me seems ridiculous. So you can imagine in just a year, we can, get -12 antagonism or something like that. And then within 5 years, it's like you could drop 50 antagonism. So perhaps I should leave feedback on this. I thought it was way too strong, and it basically just kind of made it so I didn't have to deal with coalitions much because of how I could just improve relations with different people, and I would get so much value that way. I did want to note that in 1370, we are now at 50 towards centralization. And this is going to provide us with -5 proximity impact. And proximity impact is going to play a huge role here because we need to get good control in a bunch of Russia. And for how I spend my money, early game, it's generally on roads and RGOs. So later on, we notice a free war over here. This guy has no allies, so we're just going to go ahead and annex this nation. It's kind of building up our nation as we go. And we do know that the Golden Horde is still alive. He's struggling, though. He's constantly dealing with rebels or different nations attacking him, but they're still alive for now. They just haven't really done much. Around this time, we got Our Cause is Just. If you don't know what that is, it's an EU4 event. Basically, it's just a random event you get sometimes that gives you -20 antagonism. And I don't think you need anything to get to the event. It's just, something I noticed. Hey, here's some nice antagonism, in fact. So moving ahead to 1401. In 1401, we no longer have anything to research. So we end up turning off our automate trade a little bit prior to this, and we start importing beer from Novgorod, just a ton of beer with all our trade capacity. And the reason we picked beer is I think it's just alphabetical, but it happened to be funny. We're just importing a ton of beer at a loss, and that's going to help us get the institution a bit faster. Although it does take us until 1415 to get the institution embraced. So we have a period of 14 years where we're just not researching anything. And, that is what it is. I do want to note that I'm in somewhat of a big union with Vladimir and this other Novgorod here, as well as some other random people. But I think the irrelevant ones are Vladimir, which has kind of expanded a bit, and then Novgorod, who's also kind of expanded a bit. And originally we go decentralized, but later on we'll actually go and annex them. So not getting into too much of the wars, just kind of give you an idea that we're kind of slowly expanding more and more of Novgorod, and we're kind of just like taking out, whoever we can over here. So we kind of just, expanding slowly, but definitely, pushing up our, total nation. And again, we always like to make everything into subjects, and then we're going to integrate that way. And what's really nice about Muscovy is that they're able to accept a lot of these cultures, and they also have good cultural influence. I never have to do any culture converting, which is super handy. I'm just able to kind of like accept Novgorod culture. It seems like all the cultures kind of like each other, and if cultures like each other, they're a lot cheaper to add as the accepted culture. Later on, we get a special law, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, but essentially what this law does is just gives us 1 Diplo rep as well as plus 10% improved relations modifier. So it's going to make us even better at dealing with antagonism. Something I really enjoyed or use a lot in this campaign is the support. It's basically a way that subjects can fight. You set them all as supportive and they'll attach to your armies. And this is a huge deal when we're fighting Novgorod, because without my subjects' help, I really probably couldn't beat Novgorod. So just kind of to notate, I do think that ability is very useful and well implemented. What I was saying earlier, when I embrace the next institution, it's going to be a military one. So we're going to pick up professional armies here. And then in 1416, we can also get banking. So we're kind of able to get the next two institutions right next to each other. And I'm going to push towards this bureaucracy law. And this is probably the most OP thing I've seen, but I just kind of wanted to draw you guys the tech tree for this. So you have 4 techs deep, and then you get a bureaucracy law. And this is a law that every nation gets, except Muscovy has a special option that no one else has, and it's a -20% proximity impact, which is a massive amount of proximity impact. So of course, we go ahead and take that. To update in 1426, we notice that the Golden Horde has finally fallen, and this leads to seeing nations that you typically recognize in EU4, like Kazan and Nogai, just to name a couple. But obviously, there's a lot of others as well. And during this time, we again go after Novgorod, just kind of expanding more and more into Novgorod, taking a bit more land. Novgorod actually expanded a bunch towards the Teutons, though, so that Novgorod actually owns like all of this land as well, just to kind of notate that. And we're not going to be able to take that land yet because it's just too much war score. So coming in on 1437, we do a bit of a update. We have 1.34 million pops. We're sitting on 4.2k ducats. Well, we make 123 a month. So we finally research our professional armies, which means that we can make armories. And so we're finally able to build up an army. I know that we don't have firearms, though. So we have to build a bunch of buildings that produce firearms. This is interesting because in Europe, you generally can just get firearms in the market. You don't really have to build your own. So I know at this point that we start annexing our unions. So we have like Vladimir and then Novgorod in a union. We centralized the union and we're able to annex these guys. So that was a bit of land. And then we get to the point where we want to look to form Russia. The reason we want to do that is because Russia makes you an empire. And that means that we could get an extra cabinet action. But also, there's a unique reform that gives -10 proximity impact that's specific to Muscovy/Russia. So just something that we're looking at. That also means that we got to get rid of all our subjects, because to form Russia, we need to own the land directly. So subjects don't count. In 1473, we are 300 of 500, and we're annexing a bunch of subjects as well. So this is going to add into our count. I believe at the time we have about 15 subjects. Though I want to kind of note at this point in the game, you hit a point where our professional armies start to really crush. So it feels like we have a super big advantage. We're super strong, and we have a lot of professional troops. And what I mean is really strong is I mean we start to inflict 10-1 against levies. So it's really, really like a point of change, I suppose. So then at this point, we kind of declare a mass war. We have these troops. We like co-belligerate a bunch of different nations. We kind of want to do a mass expand. We feel like our professional troops are in a pretty strong spot that we could do this. We note that in 1479, we're now at 425 of 509 to form Russia. And I know that I go ahead and just attack Perm as well as Kazan. These wars are super fast, super easy. And those wars are going to give me enough to have Russia. So we're able to form Russia in 1483. And of course, this is going to make us an empire. And that's going to allow us to enact this law. And this law is going to give us another -10 proximity impact. So you can see that Muscovy/Russia is given a lot of proximity impact. We also get that nice green color that you guys are probably familiar with in EU4, very similar to that color. And I do want to note at this point, we have roughly 70 unintegrated provinces. And remember, provinces are like states in EU4. So obviously we kind of want to deal with this because we have a lot of unintegrated land, and that gives you a -10 control debuff. So you go ahead and we give out 30 to subjects, and then we kind of start integrating with our cabinet actions. Otherwise, I kind of find the comfortable number of subjects is 30 if you're an empire. You don't have a ton of other buffs. Before we did all these subjects, though, I did note that we have about 5 million pops, and we make 370 during what I call tax season, which indicates the time of the year when Parliament tax is active. I call this tax season. I don't know why. But anyways, we are making 370 ducats during tax season. Just to draw an update, we kind of own like all of this stuff. Most of what you would look at as Russia is owned by us. I do know that Parliament is kind of nothing more than just a tax season buff for a while because we're integrating so much land. We don't really want to expand more because we already have so much to integrate. So Parliament just becomes click the highest option, unless it's roads, of course, because we're trying to push centralized. But if it's not that, we just pick the highest option, pick the taxes one, and then just let the debate fail if we don't care to pass it. We can pass it if we really want to, but there's not a lot of stuff we really want from Parliament. In the Age of Discovery, there's 2 texts that are going to be pretty useful for us. This is a bit later. But in 1492, we're going to unlock a new reform that we've been going for. And this one is going to give us 10 proximity impact. And there's another one that I didn't write the name of that gives another -5 proximity impact. These are kind of just generic ones that you can pick. I think most nations get these, or maybe several nations get these. I can't remember completely offhand. It might be a specific culture that's tied to it. But the point being is that we're able to stack this proximity cost even higher. And we make a note that in 1506, we have -68% proximity impact. So it's obviously quite strong. So I'm going to briefly explain how proximity works. So from every province, you have a proximity kind of loss, but I'm just going to kind of write down how this works. So from one province to another, you have a base of 40, as in proximity loss of 40. And then your roads are essentially a flat negative modifier that goes against it. So in the example that we have level 2 roads, we'd have -25. And then after that, your percentage modifiers are calculated. I'm just going to give you one specific example I pulled up from one of my runs. And this is going to be Zubstov, however you say these provinces. So again, this is just going to be showing you from these 2 locations. I think these are locations pretty close to Muscovy. So we're going to get -30 from development, which means we have roughly 30 development. We're going to get -5 for having a bridge, which obviously means that we have rivers here. -8.5 from centralization. -2.5 from being admin focused in the first age. Our cabinet action that we discussed earlier is currently giving us 13.5. Then we have -5 from the Supreme Court. It's the building that you unlock in the 1500s or a little bit prior to that. And then we have our government reforms. So 10 from Stardom, 10 from something like this, and then 5 from something like this. I'm not going to give the full names. And then again, we have that -20 from that law. So in this case, from this location to this, it actually costs us a base of 0.01. So essentially, there's basically no loss of control from this location to this. And sometimes you will run into locations that have maybe worse dev, or they have certain terrain effects that are going to slow it down as well. Like going through the mountains might be, I don't know the specific number, but let's say maybe it's -25 or -15. So there is some sort of modifiers, sorry, not negative, but positive. So it's not always perfect, but just to give you an example, it's pretty easy for me at this point in the game to have, let's say that, up here, let's say our capital is here. And if we own a province that's out here, we could probably still expect to get 80 to 90 control. And later on in the game, we actually can get to a point where we are able to stack negative 111%. And that essentially just means we have full control in the entirety of the world. So you guys can imagine that probably will get nerfed before release, I would say. Hey, but maybe you don't want it to be nerfed before release. It's actually pretty fun to play with too, right? You just have super high control everywhere, making tons of money, all that sort of thing. Do want to mention that we do have a special law as well that gives us an extra cabinet member. That's unique to these guys as well. Do want to notate that a lot of times when we make subjects over in, say, the land of Perm or Kazan, they're not their religion. And when you make a subject, they're going to have the local religion and culture. So what we have to do often is force religion. I just kind of want to notate how the Liberty Desire works in the EU5, just so you guys understand, is that it decays at 0.5 a month. 0.5 a month means that we get 6 Liberty Desire a year. Essentially, if we need 10 years to start annexing a subject, they've already gone down 60 Liberty Desire, and they're probably annexable at that point. So it's pretty strong. It's very easy to just force religion and then, annex a bit later. I also want to notate just something I saw is that the declare on subject glitch is back. I have a small nation that declares on one of my tiny subjects, and it's like they have no chance, but they go for it anyways. So around 1550, we have a special event where we get to invite Ivan to our nation. I'm not going to write the entire last name, but this is the guy's name. And it tells you that something neat will happen if you put him in the cabinet. So, of course, I go ahead and do that. What happens is it unlocks a new cabinet action that gives a base of 10 Diplo annexation cost, as well as 2 Diplo rep. And if I use a cabinet member to do this action, at this point in the game being 1550, and having all the cabinet efficiency that I do, this results in 25 annexation cost and 5 Diplo rep. So very, very powerful. Funny enough, though, this is right when we get this cabinet action, it actually finishes off the last subject that we had. And we don't really make subjects from here on out just because kind of find it tedious to do, and we don't really feel like we need to anymore. So I notate that, it's common that I will save up like 40,000 ducats at this point, and I'll just dump them all into, like RGOs or roads. Other buildings too, of course, like libraries are really something that we like to build. Universities like to be producing paper, so we're building lots of paper factories. I don't really need to get too much into the economy, but it is what it is. I know that around 1550 we can start getting the Age of Discovery tech, the Age of Reformation tech, and in the Reformation tech is the Frontier cabinet action. Now, I don't really like this because I've already started colonizing by this point, so it's kind of late. Also, when I actually unlock this thing, I kind of feel like it's not really worth doing. It locks up a cabinet to essentially, frontier, but you can just already colonize normally, and it doesn't seem to be any faster or slower, so I don't really see the point why you'd ever use this over just colonizing the same way. And you also are limited to only one at a time, where with colonization, you can colonize as many as you want at a time, as long as you're within range, of course. At this point, I'm kind of getting lazy, and I'm kind of super strong. I'm the #1 great power. So at this point, we have 4 hegemons: the military, diplomatic, economic, and cultural. We don't have the naval hegemon because, we don't have boats, so kind of makes sense. But the point being is that we're super, super strong, and it kind of feels like we're to that point where we're too strong, and there's not really anyone left that's a competent opponent, and I kind of don't know what to do from here. I just don't really feel like I have a clear objective, and that's my fault. I don't know if that's my fault or if it's the lack of missions. You can pin it on whatever you want, but I do have a common issue with the EU5 that once I hit around the 1500s, it feels like I'm to this point where I'm kind of just so strong that I kind of end up getting bored. So I hope they can adjust this, or maybe that's a me problem and other people would still find ways to have a lot of fun. You guys can let me know what you think in the comments below about that one. I do want to note a funny strategy that we use to fight a lot of the hordes is that I will have 3 armies that go, out of 3 professional armies that hunt armies. In this campaign, I stacked armies into something like this, where it's like 40, 20, 10, being that I have 40 infantry, cav, and then 10 artillery. And what this will translate into is obviously a lot more units, because it's 40 units of this. And by this point, each unit, I believe it's like this. So obviously, it's going to be quite a bit of guys. But anyhow, what we do is we send our professional troops just to hunt armies, and then we send all our levies. We just recruit up all the levies, and these guys just run around and carpet siege. And so even if we lose a couple of them, it's not a big deal. And the idea is that these other guys are mostly protecting them, but it's not perfect. But anyway, so kind of just like these guys carpet siege, these guys hunt the armies. And it works out pretty well. We can kind of just automate wars and take land from the hordes. It's not really difficult. We're also able to do this when we fight Poland and Lithuania. One thing I did want to notate, and I left feedback on this, something I don't like, is called the military balance. And essentially, depending on if your army is bigger or smaller than the enemy you're attacking, it's going to change the war enthusiasm by -50 to +50, so it's a 100 swing. So essentially, if you just have a bigger army than them, you can get like 10 war score, and then you can take 60 war score worth of land. So it's kind of something I think is a little bit odd, something I'd like adjusted. In final thoughts, though, I had a lot of fun with this campaign, but I ran into that classic issue that I seem to run into a lot where I just kind of get bored. Maybe it's a lack of knowing what to do. Like, do I just blob from here? I have basically endless money, huge armies, so I just kind of like don't know what to do at this point of a campaign. I did push pretty far over with colonization, and I took land almost all the way to China. But again, it's kind of just like, do I invade China just to invade China? It's kind of like, why? What's the point? I already have all the money in the world. So anyhow, let me know what you guys think about that. Kind of the problem of I don't know what to do at a certain point of a campaign. And let me know what you guys thought of Muscovy. I really did enjoy these guys.